Hello. Welcome to my talk on modern frontends with Thymeleaf and Htmx. It's already getting a bit late, second day of DevOps, so I hope everybody is still awake. So I'm a freelance Java developer at Sweet Mustard. We have a booth down below where you can play the Wordle game. Maybe some of you have already done that. I'm the author of Taming Thymeleaf. It's an in-depth guide to building a full web application using Spring Boot and Thymeleaf. So you can just follow along with the book, and at the end you will have a fully functional application with most of the things you need to take an app like that to production. Some of my favorite tools are Java, Spring, Thymeleaf, and ASCII Doctor. This presentation was also written in ASCII Doctor. So I will be explaining a bit about what Thymeleaf is, and then how Htmx enhances using Thymeleaf, and then in the second part of the presentation I will be showing quite some demos about Thymeleaf and Htmx, so you can get a feel of what you can do with it. The definition of Thymeleaf. Thymeleaf is a server-side Java template engine that uses natural templates to generate HTML pages. So that's quite some definition. What does this all mean? There's three important parts to the definition. It's a server-side Java template engine. And that first part indicates that it's something written in Java, obviously. It's a template engine. So a template engine brings an HTML template typically and data together to generate new stuff. And it's intended to run at the server side of a client-server architecture. Second important point is it uses natural templates. Natural templates, this indicates to the fact that you can take a Thymeleaf template and open it as a static page in your web browser. So there's no weird syntax going on. You can open it without the template engine, and you can obviously use it with the template engine as well. This makes it easy to collaborate between developers and designers. They could work on the same sources. The developer can just open the template in a normal browser, work with the data, and then at runtime that same template can be used by the developers. Finally, the third part of the definition is to generate HTML pages. That's of course the most important part of Thymeleaf, to get HTML pages out of it. If you look in more detail how this works exactly, if you're using Spring Boot and Thymeleaf, so at the top left we start with a client browser issuing a certain request to a URL, and that hits the application somewhere in the cloud or wherever the application runs. And then your Spring Boot application has some controller annotated classes with request mapping indicating to what URL it will react to. So Spring Boot or Spring MVC will find that controller that matches with that URL, and it will call into the controller method. It will say, please do your stuff. And it will also normally inject a model instance. And then inside your controller method, you will populate the model instance with the data which you get from a database, or you can do a REST call to another service somewhere, but basically you fill up the model with data. Then in the controller method at the end you will tell again to Spring, I want to render this Thymeleaf template. The easiest is just to return the name of the template you want to view as the return type of the controller method. The application will find a matching Thymeleaf template, and then it will call into the Thymeleaf engine. This is the template, this is the data, please generate the HTML page. And then the Thymeleaf engine returns the HTML page, and the application sends the HTML page back to the browser. At that point, Thymeleaf is no longer in the loop. So it just generates the HTML page and returns it to the browser. You can't really do anything dynamic anymore after that with Thymeleaf. First, a bit of terminology. So there's SPA and there's MPA terminology. SPA is a single page application, so that's a typical Angular or React application running in the browser. An MPA is a multi-page application, sometimes also now called classic server-side rendering, because some of the single-page application frameworks also talk about SSR, and that means something different. But here, multi-page application is really the server generating full HTML pages, sending to the client, and they are rendered there. And if you want to change something, you need to have a page reload. So what are some of the consequences of using server-side rendering or a multi-page application? One consequence is, and I'm trying not to pick sides too much, so I say consequences. So you don't need JavaScript to display the page. The HTML can be extremely lightweight, containing only HTML and CSS. And you don't need any JavaScript at all to display something. As a result, there's no dependency on the client's capabilities for the render speed. As developers, we're used to having very beefy machines, the latest iPhone or Android devices, but most of the devices are low-powered or mid-powered devices. And if you have a big Angular or React application, how powerful the client is has quite some impact on the UX of the application. With server-side rendering, you just push the full HTML to the browser, and browsers are very fast at rendering HTML, so there's a lot less dependency on the capabilities of the client for how fast your application renders, and the user of your application can start doing useful stuff with it. We also don't need JavaScript to develop the page. So maybe a tough question. Who likes to use JavaScript here? Oh, there are a few, okay. I'm not such a big fan, sorry. So with server-side rendering, you can use any technology that renders HTML. If you want to do something in a single page application, you need to use JavaScript or TypeScript. But with server-side rendering, I can stay in my favorite Java language. So for me, that's a plus. Search engine optimization is also an important thing. So if you want your website to be found by Google or any other search engine, I don't know, are there other search engines? But if you have a JavaScript-heavy application, then the bot will just look at the HTML and see a tag app, and that's it, and it doesn't know what the application is about. It would need to run the JavaScript to know what your application looks like finally. With an MPA, it just has the full HTML to index, see what's going on. So for SEO purposes, that's a lot better. Of course, a drawback of using MPAs is that a page change needs a round trip to the server. So if you want to change something on the page, you have to call into the server. The server gives you a new page with the changes and so forth. That's usually seen as a drawback of server-side rendering. Another thing is caching. If you're using server-side rendering, you get a lot of caching out of the box from the browser. I've seen cases where we had to mimic that behavior. We had to build it ourselves into our Angular application instead of just being able to rely on the browser for that. Then an important point as well is deep linkable by default. I'm sure you've had it before. You want to send a link to a particular page to a colleague, and if it's a single page application, sometimes that's not even possible if the developers didn't think to update the URL, because with a single page application you can have one URL, change many states in the application, but the URL never changes. And with multi-page application, just because how it works, you always need a URL for any page on your application. So any state can be reached via the URL, That's just how it works by default. I once saw a video from, I think it was in React, where somebody explained how to do that, and I was like, so difficult. I get that out of the box with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf. Because you have to remember to update the URL, and you also have to remember if the URL contains something to update the state of your application as well. So it's not that straightforward, it seems. Typically, you will also have a smaller page size, because you don't usually need so much JavaScript, so the page is smaller. Of course, with a single page application, you have a bigger upfront cost, and then if you communicate using JSON, that typically will be a bit smaller than re-rendering the full page each time. And then a final point is, and you can look at it from two ways. With server-side rendering, I find it's easier to have a coherent team where everybody can kind of work on everything. With a single page application, you will always typically have a front-end team and a back-end team. So, or you can say it's harder to split the team with a multi-page application. But my question is, do you really want to split on technological boundaries? Maybe you want everybody to be able to work on everything. And not split on technological boundaries, but more on functional ways. If we now look at an example of how does a simple controller work with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf, we can see an example here. So we have just a normal class called root controller, and then on line 8 we see the add controller annotation. And line 9, the add request mapping. So this indicates that this controller will come into play if there is a request to the root URL. And then below we have our index method using the get mapping annotation. So if there is a get request to the root URL, this index method is called. On line 13 we have the model being injected by Spring, and then we can start put stuff in the model. So you can think of it as a hash map. So here we'll put under the scientist's key the names of 3 scientists, add them to the model, and then finally on line 18 we return the Thymeleaf template that we want to have rendered. In this case it's just index.html that we want to have rendered. This is an example template. Well, in fact it's not a template yet, this is just an empty HTML5 file. To make it a Thymeleaf template, we add the namespace on line 3 for the th prefix there, and we can start using the Thymeleaf features. For example, I can add a title. You see the h1, so all very normal HTML, and there's an attribute th-text. So we have between the h1 tags, we have scientist, so let's say the English translation there, and that's what you would see if you would open this in a browser without Thymeleaf being present. And then th-text, this will replace what's between the h1 tag at runtime with the translation of the key scientists.title. So the hashtag indicates a translation there. And then some more code where we do an iteration. So on line 10, we iterate over our scientists list, assign the variable scientist to that, and then we can use that inside of the list item to print out the name of the scientist. And now if we render this very simple application, we have the 3 scientists on the page. So yeah, that's really the very basics of Thymeleaf, and expanding onto that you can build almost anything you want. Now I'll continue a bit with page reloads, and this person, David Whitney, asks himself, is the biggest SPI lie ever told that page reloads are bad UX? And then Paul Bort answers, and we all have to believe him because it's on Twitter, so it must be true. Page reloads are great UX if they compete within 1 second. Bookmarkable, browser back button works as expected, easy to open in multiple tabs, and helpful for troubleshooting. And I think he picks up a few good points there, because if I hear complaints about SPAs not working too well, that's things that tend to come up. That browser back button support, or I can't open a new tab to quickly have a duplicate of what I was viewing to view another part of the application side to side, or things like that. Of course, we still have the thing that, yeah, but I want rich dynamic behavior. So I want to, on the one hand, I like Thymeleaf. On the other hand, I want to have a more interactive website where I don't have to do page reload for everything I need. So do we really need to choose? And if I go the single page application way, things become very involved and difficult quite quickly. Moreover, the ThoughtWorks technology radar, I don't know if you know this, in their latest episode, they said using single page application by default, we should probably put that on hold. And I'm going to quote what they say. Single page applications incur complexity that simply doesn't exist with traditional server-based websites. Too often, though, we don't see teams making that trade-off analysis, blindly accepting the complexity of SPAs by default, even when the business needs don't justify it. So they're not saying don't use SPAs. Obviously, they have a lot of advantages as well. But what they're saying is, don't just blindly go for that. Think about what are the requirements and do we really need these SPAs. Now, I have a kind of a solution for that dynamic behavior, otherwise I wouldn't be here for my talk. And there are a few libraries popping up now, and these are 3 of them, but there may be more. There's Unpoly, there's Hotwire, and Htmx, which I will discuss. Unpoly, I don't know that much about it, but Hotwire, that's something in the Rails community that's used a lot, and it's built by the people from Basecamp, and they built that to build their Hey email client, which is based on Ruby on Rails. And then Htmx. So what is Htmx, in fact? Htmx is a JavaScript library which will help you write less JavaScript. And what it does, it allows you to add HTML attributes to any HTML tag. And it allows you to trigger get post requests, but also put and patch requests, on any element. So not only on buttons or not only on forms, any element can have those. And the big change is you're not building a JSON API with this. You're building an HTML API. So typically you will render the full page, and then you will have some HTMX attributes to some elements that calls back into your browser, and that returns HTML snippets. Those HTML snippets are put in the DOM dynamically, or they replace some part of your page like that. And the nice thing is that you can start without HTMX and you can just apply it where it makes sense. If you're saying, let's quickly write some web application, and then while you're busy, you see, oh, we could really improve the user experience by doing some dynamic stuff here. You can just apply HTMX there without having to rewrite your whole application. And Htmx is also backend agnostic, so I'm using it with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf, but it's used a lot with Django and Python, or with Laravel and PHP as well. So it really doesn't matter. As long as you have a backend that can generate HTML, you can use it with whatever you want. Let's look at an example now of how does Htmx look like in code. Here, we have input. So it's not part of a form, it's just a free input within your page, and it has the name Q. And there are three HX-related, HTMX-related attributes there. So we have the HXGet, the HXTrigger, and the HXTarget. The HXGet indicates the URL that the request will go to. So it's /trigger delay, and then the queue of the input will be added as a query parameter to that URL with the value of the input, obviously. So, and then the question becomes, when will HTMX trigger that request? You can see that in the HX trigger. So it's on key up. So whenever a key was pressed and there's a key up event, if the value actually changed, and then there's also a delay of 500 milliseconds. So if nothing was typed in the last 500 milliseconds, only then it will be sent. Otherwise, it will wait. So there's like a bounce off there. So Htmx does the request to the server. The server returns HTML. And what will it do with the HTML that comes back? It will put the HTML into the target. So the HX target indicates with the CSS selector where the result should go. So inside that div, it will put the results. I'm going to show a small demo now. So on the Htmx website, there's lots of examples. And one of the examples is the active search. So here we have an empty table and a search box. And then I can start to type some name. And we see a search, a progress indicator, when we see the table updating dynamically. And what's nice is we can see here what's happening. So initially, we have just the empty table. We have our input with our HX attributes. And then in this case, they're using a post request to this search. This post request returns, so it sends the search query, and then it returns all the rows, and those are swapped in. So and that's each time what we see. And this updates the table dynamically. So this is a demo from the website of Htmx, and I wanted to take this a bit further. And I've did some demos using Thymeleaf and Spring Boot. Okay. All right. So this is to-do MVC. I don't know. Maybe you've seen that before. It's an application, and it has many implementations in many different technologies. What I did is I recreated this with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf. And it's just very basic. You can add a to-do, let's say speak at Devox. If I press enter, then that happens. Eat something. Whatever. So you can complete to-do items, you can delete them, you can search here or filter. And we have here how many items are left. So this is a regular Spring Boot application, Thymeleaf with Spring Boot application. So each time I click, I don't know if it's visible on the big screen, but there's always here a page reload going on. So that's that. Now what we can do is, and they call it within the Htmx, they call it the gateway drug to Htmx, is we can add a single attribute, hxBoost equals true, and when we do that, we get this. So it's really the same application, only I added the Htmx JavaScript library, and I've added the hxBoost equals true at the top of the application. And now what happens, well, it doesn't matter what I type, but as you can see, there are no page reloads now. I can show this in the inspector as well. Well, there are no page reloads visible to the user is more the correct term, because if you look here, I don't know if I can zoom in a bit. You can still see the post going on and the redirect. So that's classical with server-side rendering. You do a post and a redirect and a get. But it's all hidden from the user. So if you currently have a Thymeleaf application and you want to turn it into a single-page application, you can do that in 5 minutes. But of course, it's not very efficient, let's say, because you're still sending the whole page back and forward, and just within JavaScript, they match the nodes and they just change what needs to change. So a better use of Htmx is actually implementing small fine-grained updates. So to do that, what we really want to do is just send a request to add a new to-do item and only get like the row of the new to-do item back and swap that into the page. So we don't send so much data back and forward. And how do we do that with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf? Is we add a post mapping and we say headers equals hx request, because that's what Htmx will put in the request, this header, so we know the request comes from Htmx. And we'll render a fragment. So Thymeleaf allows you to not render the full page or the full template, but just a small snippet that you can give a name. So we'll render just this single to-do item. And the great thing is I'm reusing the snippet that I used to build up the page. So if I do a full page refresh, I'm also using that to-do item fragment. So I'm sure that code is always in sync with each other. I'm also adding a trigger. So this will force on the client side the trigger, and we'll show you why in a minute. Yeah, and so triggering that post request is done on the input element. And we do it on key up with the filter key equals enter. So if I press the enter key, it will do the post with the value of the input. And here we have the target is the to-do list. But we don't want to replace the whole to-do list when we add. We just want to add it at the end of the to-do list. So with saying hx swap before end, we just add it before the end of that to-do list. So, and that keeps the list growing. Should be started. So if we now refresh, and I press enter. So what now happens is there is a request done, so a post with the payload, so just the title of the to-do item. And here we have the response, and the response is just the list item with the toggle checkbox and the label, and then the button that appears on Hoover. So now we're doing really fine-grained updates of the HTML. So I showed that event as well, and that event is important because if you only update this list item, but there are other parts of the page that need to respond or react to that, we need a way to do that. We have the one item left. So if I add another item, you will see one item left changes to two items left. And the way that works is the server sends to the client like, oh, there's an item added, and other parts of the page can listen for those events. And then they can in their turn do a GET request to the server to get themselves updated. And this is what the active items count thing looks like. So the little so many items left at the bottom. Here we say if there is any trigger coming from anywhere on the page with the item added, and there's some others as well, like if you toggle or if you delete an item, then do a GET request back to the server to update yourself. So that's how we can keep these things up to date with one another, so different parts of the page can communicate through those events to stay up to date. Right. So another demo I have is an IoT demo. So I learned today from the talk by James Gosling that IoT is one of the start points for Java. So it's fitting I have a demo on that as well. Here I've built 4 times and yeah, it's just a demo application. But if you using standard Spring Boot and Thymeleaf, this is the user experience you sometimes get. So you go to the page and it spins a bit, and then finally you get the information you want. But the experience is not so great because you're staring at an empty page and you have the feeling that things are slow. What you can do with Htmx is just say, I immediately show the information I have available immediately. So in this example, it's like 6 temperature sensors, and we get that from the database, so that's fast. And then to get the actual temperature, we need to go to the devices, and so that's slow. So with Htmx, we can just easily show a spinner while it waits, so we get immediately feedback. And then when the reading comes back, we update the page dynamically. So if you look at, let's open the DevTools once more. So you can see the page is loading, and the page has some here on load, and the trigger is load. So as soon as the page is loaded, this GET request is done, and then it swaps out the HTML that comes back. And we see here the 6 devices are all queried at the same time, and you have a lot faster feedback. What you can also do is you just add a refresh button. You don't need to go full page refresh, just click on the refresh button to update the device where you want to get the new temperature for. And here we see the requests going to the server and back swapping in the HTML. And then a final thing you can also do is auto refresh. So what Htmx has is this trigger notion of every 1 second, every 5 seconds, whatever you want. You just tell it, do those GET requests on that frequency, and it will just keep doing that and updating your page in a polling fashion. If you don't want to use polling, there's also an option of using server-sent events or WebSockets. I also have a small demo on that. Let me quickly fire it up. So for those of you that might not know it, server-sent events is like one-way traffic from the server to your browser. WebSockets, you can do two-way traffic, but server-sent event is a bit easier to set up and work with. Yeah, so this one is protected by Spring Security. So now I'm logged in, and now I'm going to open up, where's, for instance, another browser. Looking at the same application, I'll use the same user. And then, oh no. We have that, and then we'll open up another browser. And there we'll use user 2. So what will happen now is I will press this button. This will do a request to the server, and then over the server sent events channel, it will push back updates of what's going on at the server with the progress bar. And it knows the logged on user, so it sends those same events to everywhere that user is logged on. So I'll press here, but watch also the other browser there. So you see the progress bar is happening on both instances where user 1 is logged on and the other one is it's not happening. So I think that's a nice thing and very easy to implement as well. Just a few attributes and sending those HTML over the socket, and that's it. So here we see again the code for that. So the first thing I showed you was the get on load. So there we say the HX trigger is on load. So the full page is rendered, then Htmx is loaded, and this triggers the get request, and then this gets all the information dynamically. The refresh button, we have the button here, again, a get to an endpoint with a target and an indicator, so you have the spinner going on while the request is busy. And this is the auto refresh, so it's literally writing every X seconds how often you want the updates to happen. Now, obviously, Htmx has its uses. Where should you not use it? If you really want to have like very fast client-side interaction, like pop-up menu or custom toggle buttons, things like that, I think Alpine.js is very fit to do that. If you want to write a browser game, obviously that would be too slow to go to the server and back. Or if you want to build jwt.io, where they clearly state if you paste the token here, it will not go to our servers. That would obviously be a bad use case for that. When should you use HTMX? I think, in my opinion, if you want to build a dynamic website without any JavaScript headaches, then I think it's a great fit to do that. If you want to incrementally add dynamic behavior to an existing Thymeleaf application, so bring it in forward with dynamic interaction, that's also a great use case. And what's great with Thymeleaf is they have this fragments support, so you can reuse what you do to build the full page, use it for partial updates, so all these things are always synced with each other. If you do it manually on fully in JavaScript part and then part in templates with Thymeleaf, might not be exactly the same. Now, you can use Htmx out of the box with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf, but it's a bit of a struggle there. I don't know if you noticed, but in the example, like here, so it becomes a bit complicated to indicate to Thymeleaf the attributes, because you need these Thymeleaf expressions because you have some dynamic things going on there. And what I've built is there's this Htmx Spring Boot Thymeleaf library on GitHub. It's open source, and it contains Thymeleaf dialect, and it has Spring MVC helpers. No, I did not build this all by myself. I had help from Clint Checketts and Oliver Drodboom to do that, so thank you very much to them. And what this brings is, instead of this th-attr and then within that all that information, you can now just use hx colon get And then within the value, you can start using Thymeleaf expressions. So that makes it a bit nicer in that regard. Also the Spring MVC helpers. So we saw the post mapping with the HX request and all these things. So you can do it like this, but it's a lot nicer if you can do it like this instead. So we just add the annotation HX request. So that will tell Spring Boot only call into this method if it's actually an Htmx request. And then the HX trigger indicates when you send it back, add item added to the response as an HX trigger. So the code cleans up nicely with these helpers, I think. One thing that's not possible out of the box is out-of-band responses. And what this means is if you're having this update, like I showed you, of the to-do item, so we're sending back just the list item, put it on the page, and then we had this event at the client side to update the counter. A bit of a drawback with that is we're doing two calls. So we're doing the initial post, we get back the list item, and then we need to do another GET request to update the number of items at the bottom. Using the library, we can fix that and do one call. Htmx supports something called out-of-band responses, where you return like the main HTML, but then you can add onto that several other parts of HTML. And as long as that ID that it refers to is already on the page, it can replace that as well in one call, let's say. So I also have a demo on that. So yeah, at the application itself, you won't see any difference. But you will see a difference here. So now there's only one call that has happened. And what we get back is, again, our list item. So that's what's being changed here. But next to that, we also sending this active items count. And this has this attribute, HX swap out of bounds true. So Htmx knows it needs to find the HTML item with active items count on the page and then swap in whatever we return here. So it updates that in one go. So there's two ways to do multiple updates. So you can do the events or you can do the out of bounds swaps. Probably still time will tell what's the best way or where are things more applicable. That's still to be figured out a bit. All right. And then one final demo is, this is the Devox website. You should all know that. And what you can see, you can search for people here. You can type James, for example. And this is a typical server-side rendered thing. So I've learned from the organizer that it's WordPress and PHP, so server-side rendering. So we have to type a name, we get a new page with the results. Of course, we can share this page and this URL, that's an advantage, and then we can go there. What we can build with, if we would build this with Thymeleaf and Htmx, and what we could do is build an active search, which is a bit nicer. And I'm going to open that up. So this is an application built with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf, and it uses the, what's it called again, the DB API something to show some movie posters and some details about those movies. I didn't create the design. I took this from a very nice YouTube series on Livewire, and I thought I need to build that same thing in Thymeleaf because it looks very nice. So you can open up the images here. But the most important part is we have a search field, just like on the Devox website. And here we can do search for a movie. So, and if I start to type, we get these search results immediately. We can click on one and go to the results there. We can search for another one. So you see the feedback we get. We get the indicator at the top right there if we're searching for stuff. So yeah, I think that's could be an improvement there. And that's basically it. If you want to learn more, there's the Discord of Htmx. There's all kind of channels for all the different server-side languages. Of course, there's my book if you want to learn more about Thymeleaf and Spring Boot. And there's lots to learn about Spring at this conference as well. I also have a blog at wimdeblauwe.com where I regularly blog about all these things, so you can learn more there as well. Thank you. I still have like 4 minutes left. If there are questions, please go ahead. Yes?
Do you have example of real-world application that use Thymeleaf?
There's lots of real-world applications that use Thymeleaf, but probably not like really well-known applications, but there's lots of internal business applications that use Thymeleaf for sure. And in regard with Htmx, there's one example that I currently know of that replaced their React frontend with, and it was with Django, Django and Htmx, and they were really happy with how it turned out. They were able to reduce a lot of complexity. They were able to make it more, to show more search results as well because it was faster. So that's the only real-world case I know of, and I'm also using it in one project currently. Another question? Yes?
The question, if you try to inject an active element by the HTMLX, it will be automatically binded.
What do you mean with an active element?
You inject a fragment that contains Nginx attributes.
So
HTMLX. With the HTMLX attribute, get attribute, you add an element from the server,
yes.
HTML fragment, into your page. But this fragment will contain HTMLX attributes also.
Yeah, that's not a problem. HTMX arranges that. You can totally do that. There's also an eventing system there. If you need to reinitialize, if you have certain components that you swap in that use JavaScript, you can reinitialize them as they appear on the page. That's certainly a possibility, yes. Any other questions? No, then I thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.